Hello everyone, welcome to the course of Survey of Major English-Speaking Countries. Today, we're going to learn Chapter 2, The History of Great Britain. This lecture is about Lesson A, the early invasion history of Great Britain. The British Isles have witnessed intermittent periods of competition and cooperation between the people that occupy the various parts of the Great Britain. Today, the British Isles contain two sovereign states, the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. Today, we're going to focus on one sentence in this chapter. The British history has been a history of invasions. Why? Why is this the case that the history of Great Britain is the history of invasion? I hope after this lecture, you can answer this question with details. Before the 1st century AD, Britain was made up of many tribal kingdoms of Celtic people, a powerful culture originating in Central Europe. In 55 and 54 BC, Roman general and future dictator Gaius Julius Caesar launched two separate invasions of British Isles, though neither resulted in a full Roman occupation of this island. 100 years later, then in 43 AD, Britain was invaded by the Roman Empire. England and Wales became a part of the empire for nearly 400 years. Britain subsequently became a Roman province and remained so until the beginning of the 5th century. Many of the native Celts were driven to the mountainous regions of Scotland and Wales, which remained unconquered by the Romans. As the Roman Empire came under threat from the east, the Roman armies and the Roman protections was withdrawn from Britain, and Britain was again divided into small kingdoms, and again it came under threat from outside. This time, from Germanic people, the Anglo and the Saxons. Soon after the Roman left, the Angles, the Saxons, and Jews landed in Britain. They drove the Britons to the mountains, and those they didn't flee remained as slaves to the new invaders. The Angles settled in East, Midland, and the North, the Saxons in the South and the Midlands, and the Jews in the South and the Southeast. From that time on, English replaced the old Celtic language as the dominant language of the land. The country became known as England, meaning the land of Angles. The Anglo-Saxons were organized into the tribes governed by a chief or a king. They had a mixed economy of farming, hunting, and animal husbandry. Their social union was not determined by kingship, but rather by the village. Private ownership had come into existence, but everyone was subject to control by the village as a whole. The Anglo-Saxons were not Roman Christian when they went to Britain. By orders of Pope Gregory I, St. Augustine was sent to Britain to convert the Anglo-Saxons. St. Augustine arrived with 40 missionaries. They completed their task smoothly and converted many Anglo-Saxons to Roman Christianity. By the 7th century, Roman Christianity became the dominant religion in Great Britain. One of the best-known English legends derives from this time. In the 5th century AD, it is said that a great leader appeared, unite the British, and with his magical sword, Excalibur, drove the Saxons back. This is the story of King Arthur, and has been embellished by singers, poets, novelists, and even filmmakers ever since. Although King Arthur's real existence is in doubt, you can visit places associated with his legend, such as the Cliff Edge Castle at the Tingattle in Cornwall. According to the legend, Arthur gathered a company of knights to him, who sat together at Arthur's castle at Camelot. Conflicts between his knights led to Arthur creating the famous Round Table, at which all would have equal precedence. Perhaps this could be seen as an indicator of the way in which the English have wished to see their monarch as something other than a remote dictator, and have in fact managed to gradually bind the monarchy into a more democratic system, rather than completely rejecting it. Whatever Arthur's success was, legend or not, it didn't last. For the Anglo-Saxons did succeed in invading Great Britain, and either absorbed the Celtic people or pushed them to the western and the northern edges of Britain. Despite the fact that contemporary English people think of King Arthur as their hero, really, he was fighting against them. For those Anglo-Saxon invaders were the forefathers of English, the founder of the Anglo-land, or England, as it has become known today. Two more groups of invaders were to come after the English, from the late 8th century on. Raiders from Scandinavia, the ferocious Vikings, threatened Great Britain's shores. Their settlements in England grew until large areas of northern and eastern England were under their control. By then, the English heroes were truly English, such as King Alfred the Great, who turned the tide in south against the Vikings. There remains to this day where certain culture divided between Northerners and Southerners in England, which, while not consciously Saxons versus Dane, may have its origin in this time. The richer Southerners tend to think of Northerners as less sophisticated than themselves, while Northerners think Southerners arrogant and unfriendly. They are also marked by having distinct different accents. The next invaders were the Normans, from northern France, who were the descendants of Vikings. In 1066, the King Edward the Confessor died without an heir. Harold of Wessex, his brother-in-law, was crowned king. However, Duke William of Normandy challenged Harold's succession. Under William of Normandy, also known as William the Conqueror, they crossed the English Channel in 1066, and in the Battle of Hastings, defeated an English army under the King Harold. This marks the last time that an army from outside the British Isles succeeded in invading. William took the English throne and became William I of England. The Tower of London, a castle in the center of London which he built, still stands today. The Normans didn't settle England to any great extent. Rather, they imported a ruling class. The next 300 years may be thought as a Norman aristocracy ruling a large Saxon and English-speaking population. It is this situation which produced another of England's heroic legends. This is the legend of Robin Hood, the Saxon nobleman oppressed by the Normans, who became an outlaw and it was his band of merry men hid in the forest of Sherwood in the north of Midlands of England. From this secret place, armed with their long bows, they then went out to rob from the rich to give to the poor. He has featured in many television series and films, both British and American. The next few hundred years following the Norman invasion can be seen as a process of joining together the various parts of the British Isles under English rule, so that many English identity eventually became swamped by the necessity of adopting a wider British identity, both to unite the kingdom internally and to present a single identity externally as British became an imperial power. Just now, we have learned the process of early invasions in Great Britain. Here, I have a question for all of you to think about. What did the invasion bring to the country? As a result of Roman conquest, the recorded written history began in Great Britain, and many signs of Roman civilization spread over the country. There had been no cities in Britain before the Romans conquered it. The civilized Romans were city dwellers, and as soon as they had conquered Britain, they began to build towns, splendid villas, public baths, as in Rome itself. York, Gloucester, Lincoln, and London became the chief Roman towns. There were also about 50 other smaller towns. London, which had been a smaller trading settlement before the conquest, now became a center for trade, both by roads and the river. Many cities sprang up round the Roman military camps. The town of Bath became famous for its hot springs. The towns grew up as markets and centers of administration. In most towns, there were marketplaces and plenty where merchants sold their goods. The rich merchants and officials had luxury houses, which contained many rooms, with central heating and water supply. Every Roman town had a drainage system and a good supply of pure water. Temples and public baths could be found in most towns. The Romans were great road makers, and now a network of roads connected all parts of the country. Just like the saying goes, all the roads lead to Rome. Along the roads, new towns and villages sprang up. Great tracts of forest were cleared. Swamps were drained, and the cornfields took their place. The province of Great Britain became one of the granaries of the Roman Empire. A constant trade was carried on with other parts of the empire. The chief exports were corn, lead, tin, and building tiles. The goods were sent in wagons along the roads of Britain, Gaul, and Italy to Rome. Britain imported luxury goods, especially fine pottery and metalware. But together with a high civilization, the Romans brought exploitation and slavery to the British Isles. Rich Romans had villas in the country with large estates, which were worked by gangs of slaves. Prisoners of war were sent to the slave markets in the Roman Empire. The free Celts were not turned into slaves, but they had to pay heavy taxes to the conquerors and were made to work for them. The Romans made them clean forests, drain swamps, build roads, bridges, and walls for defense. That was how the famous Hadrian's Wall was built too. Among the Celts themselves, inequality began to grow. The tribal chiefs and nobility became richer than other members of the tribe. Many of them became officials acting for Rome. Tribal chiefs who submitted were appointed to rule their people as before. But now, they acted in the name of the Roman emperor. The noble Celts adopted the mode of life of their conquerors. They lived in rich houses, and they dressed as Romans. They were proud to wear toga, which was the sign of being Roman citizens. They spoke Latin, the language of the Romans. In a word, in language, architecture, lifestyle, economy, trading, administration, and transportation, Romans shaped Britain in early civilization. During the Anglo-Saxon period, the biggest legacy was their language. The dialectic language of the Anglo-Saxons became the most commonly used language today in the world. After the Norman conquest, the consequences were many and varied. The French Norman brought many changes to the country. Anglo-Saxon elites, the largest landholders in England, were replaced by Franco-Normans. The system of feudalism developed as William gave out lands in return for military service, either in person or a force of knights paid for by the landowner. 11 of 15 bishops were Normans, and only one of the other 4 was English. The church had power over the people and land, and now William had power over them. During this period, the contact and especially trade between English and continental Europe greatly increased, and the two countries of France and England became historically intertwined, initially due to the crossover of land ownership. Norman nobles holding lands in both countries. To the language, the syntax and the vocabulary of Anglo-Saxon Germanic language were significantly influenced by the French language. The Norman conquest of England then resulted in long-lasting and significant changes for both the conquered and the conquerors. The fate of the two countries of England and France would become inexorably linked over the following centuries, as England became a much stronger and united kingdom within the British Isles, and an influential participant in European politics and warfare thereafter.